This lesson's about rules for multiplying signed numbers. So we've been working with signed numbers, adding and subtracting, and mostly adding, right? Because even when we look at something like this, which we would write 5 subtract 3, that's simpler. We're still adding them. We're still taking a 5 and a negative 3 and we're putting them together, aren't we? Okay, so we're still adding. So that's 2. We talked about the opposite of a number, and we talked about the opposite of a negative number. What's the opposite of negative 6?
6.
It's positive 6. Does that make sense to everybody? You can see that on the number line. We talked about that. We covered that. Okay. So you need to have that in mind when we talk about the rules for multiplication. Now let me tell you, if all you ever had to do was add, or all you ever had to do was multiply, you would never have a problem. It's when you have to do both things and you have to remember and keep the rules separate, okay? That gets a little bit difficult sometimes. But the rules for either one are not difficult. Okay, you've already learned how to add. You guys are great. You can look at a problem like this. How long does it take you to say, oh, what's the sign here?
Negative.
Yeah, it's negative. Negative what? Okay, you guys are good at this. Okay? And you just can't lose that now that we start talking about multiplication. So multiplication, all we do is look at how many negatives there are when we multiply. Okay, that's all it is. And we've already talked about the odd-even rule, haven't we? Okay, so we talk about if I have no negatives, well, that's positive. If I have one negative, that's negative. What happens when we have two negatives? When I say the opposite of negative 4? Positive. What happens if I have 3 negatives? Negative 4. And we're just going back and forth on the number line, aren't we? So that odd-even rule is the rule that we also use for multiplication. Okay? All you care about when you multiply is how many negatives there are, and is that number odd or even. Okay? If it's odd, you guys already know the answer. Negative. And if it's even, positive. Okay? And that's all we're going to worry about. So, here we go. So if I'm multiplying two numbers together, what I need you to do is I need you to look at that first and think about, okay, is the answer here going to be positive or negative? Well, there's one negative. That's odd. So, negative. And then multiply. Don't go 15 and then worry about the sign later. Or you'll forget about the sign, you won't put it down, and it's just trouble. Just like when we're adding, we need to think about the sign first. So, I think so many times you guys are doing problems like this, and I'll hear 42. And then you worry about, oh, is the answer positive or negative? Is that the way we do it? No, you think about, okay, it's positive, and then you worry about what 6 times 7 is. And if you do it in that order, life will be so much better for you. Okay? So, that's it. That's the whole lesson. That is the whole lesson on multiplying signed numbers. Wow. I know, right? It really, I'm out of paper. We can go through a whole bunch of other things. We can talk about a whole bunch of other things. But what's the answer here?
Negative 8.
You guys were thinking about the 8 before you were thinking about the negative.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's try that again. What's the answer here?
Negative.
Negative? Oh, I love that. Negative. I don't care if you count on your fingers. I don't care what you got to do. Okay? But you worry about the sign first. The parentheses that show us multiplication. Hey, thanks, Lance. Sometimes they're a little weird. Sometimes we look at that and we think it's 3 subtract 2. But see how the 3's right next to the parenthesis? Okay? Whenever you have a number right next to the parenthesis, that's telling you to multiply. Okay? And so, you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay? Negative 4 times positive 3,
Negative 12.
negative 12, okay? We can have both of them in parentheses,
15.
positive 15. And I don't usually write the positive, but if this said 4 subtract that, okay, or 4 plus that amount, then I would have to put 4, and then I would want to put down a positive 15. We'll talk more about that later, but so you see those mean the same thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now let's talk about division. Ready? It's the same deal. I know. Only with division, you can only divide 2 things. You can't, like with multiplication, you can multiply a whole bunch of numbers together, right? With division, you can only have 2. So of course, if they're both positive, answer is positive. If one of them is negative, the answer is negative. And it doesn't matter which one. Okay, negative 6. If both of them are negative, that's 2 negatives, so
Negative. Oh, positive.
positive. So the rules for multiplication and division are the same thing. Okay, all you do is how many negatives are. Now, for today, we're only multiplying 2 numbers together at a time. So we're not going to get any problems today where we have, like negative 3 times negative 5 times negative 2. Okay, that'll come later, although it's not really any harder. Okay, all we're doing here. Wait a minute, wouldn't that have been negative though? Okay. Anyway, what is this now? Positive. That is right. Whatever. Positive 15, right? Okay. So everything you do today with multiplying, it's just going to be 2 numbers. Okay. So there's either going to be 1 negative or 2 negatives or no negative. That's it. Okay. So let's all look at set 9. Number 1 is the product or quotient. Now we talked about these 2 words, right? Is the answer to a multiplication problem or division problem is the product or quotient of 2 signed numbers that have the same sign. If they have the same sign, is that answer going to be positive or is it going to be negative?
Positive.
Every time,
Yep.
right? Every single time. Okay? Every single time. What if they have opposite signs?
Negative.
That means if there's 2 numbers and they have opposite signs, that means one's positive, one's negative. Does it matter how many positives there are, by the way?
No.
No, it doesn't matter. It only matters how many negative signs there are, right? So 1A, what do we decide? Same sign?
Positive.
Positive. 1B, different signs, negative. Oh, this is rough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the entire lesson. Easiest lesson of the year.